Truly is risen.
In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Today we celebrate the holy Myrrh-bearing women. Also the righteous Joseph and Nicodemus we hear about in today's gospel from the Gospel of Mark. We oftentimes, when we celebrate this week, we want to look at the virtues. The church calls us to look at the virtues of these women, particularly. Of course, Nicodemus and Joseph are incorporated into this, but more specifically, the women who found themselves in the influence of our Savior, Jesus Christ. And so we should go ahead and look at these virtues that these women proclaimed and had instilled in their hearts, so that we can maybe also likewise be Myrrh-bearers. The first virtue that these women had were they were students. They were students. We hear about this in the Gospel. Two of the Myrrh-bearers are Martha and Mary, the brothers of Lazarus. And we hear that Christ used their home often to host and to teach. In fact, there was a disagreement between the two sisters at one point about who was doing the right thing, the one who was serving or the one who was being a student, who was at the feet of the Lord and learning all his wisdom, all his teaching, his good news. And so these women, they followed around Christ, and they were students of the Word, students of his teachings. And so for each and every one of us, we too need to emulate this. We need to become students, followers of Christ, true disciples, where we learn more about our faith, learn more about the Scriptures, the writings of the Fathers. We need to be students like these women. And likewise, that story of Mary and Martha, these women were servants. They were servants. They had a spirit of service within them. By that same story, you can see that oftentimes they were the hostess. They were taking care of those that were flocking around the Lord, offering their homes, offering their food. In fact, the Gospel of St. Luke says that these Myrrh-bearing women gave out of their abundance so that Christ could do his ministry. So that means they gave their money and everything they had in abundance in order so that Christ, who still had need of earthly things to walk around for 3 years without really a job, to teach everyone that he encountered, to do his healings and his miracles, he needed to have sustenance, and so they provided for him. And so likewise, these women teach us the virtue of being servants, to serve others, to offer our talent, both our time, our energy, and also that of our financial resources, primarily to Christ and to the church. These women also are imbued with the virtue of courage. These women followed Christ for his earthly ministry, and then they followed him all the way to the cross, when the apostles themselves fled in fear. But these women did not. They watched him suffer on the cross and did not leave him. They were so courageous that they even followed Nicodemus and Joseph, who had permission from Pilate to put Christ in the tomb. They followed them to see where the body was going to be laid, so they can later come and take care of the body properly, as was according to their custom. They had great courage. They did not live by fear, but they lived by faith. They had guards at that tomb, and yet they still went. They still went, probably scared, but they still acted on faith. And so they had great courage. I'm often recalled with the hymnography in our church whenever we have a woman martyr saint. The hymnography says that she lived a faith of manly courage. A woman who was living more like a man. And these women were more manly than the apostles. Were more manly than the apostles at this time. And so we have to cultivate this virtue of courage, of doing what's right, even when everyone else says we shouldn't. We have to have strong faith and not live in a spirit of fear, which primarily today kind of governs us in this world. A spirit of fear. We have to have courage and live by faith and do what is right. And the final virtue that these women have was loyalty. They were loyal to Jesus. They loved Christ. Loved him. To do all those other things to serve him, to learn from him, and to have courage to go against the authorities to be near him. Shows how loyal they are to him. Their loyalty actually was beyond reason, really. They didn't really have a reasonable way of loyalty to Christ. They went to the tomb, where we hear in the Gospel today of St. Mark, that they knew that there was this great, because they saw it, this great stone blocking the sepulchre, that they knew that they were not going to be able to move. They did not let that reasoning, that logic, stop them from being loyal to Christ. They still went. And as we know, they were quite surprised and blessed to see that that stone was gone, and angels would proclaim to them that the Lord is risen. And because of their loyalty, they were the first ones to have an experience of hear the news of the risen Lord. And they became the first evangelists, the first ones to go and preach about the good news that Christ is risen, truly is risen. They were to go to the apostles and tell them because of their loyalty. And a loyalty that didn't follow our human reason and logic sometimes. And so we need to have this kind of loyalty to Christ, this kind of loyalty to the church, when sometimes it just doesn't make sense. But we still go forward. Sometimes there's going to be great obstacles in our ways, in our parishes. Oftentimes it seems we have these barriers that are insurmountable for us to overcome in our parish life, in our spiritual lives. But we stay loyal to Christ and plunge ahead with courage like these women, we too will be granted this blessing to see these stones rolled away from our hearts, so that it will be opened up to Christ and we see the risen Christ alive within us. And so these four virtues that are so obvious when we see the totality of the Gospels of these women who followed Christ, this service, this being students of Christ, having great manly courage, and being loyal to the very end. These are the virtues, brothers and sisters, that we are called to take up this week. This is why this is here. This is why we read the third week of Passover. We come back to the center of the tomb, so that we can learn from these great women, these four great virtues, that we need to instill right now in our homes, in our parishes, and in the world. Christ is risen.
Surely is risen.
The blessing of the Lord be upon you. There was grace and love for mankind, always now and ever, and unto the age of ages.